Right now, somewhere in the world, decisions are being made that could affect millions of lives. Across the Middle East, tensions have reached a dangerous level. Missiles have already been launched. Military forces remain on high alert, and global leaders are watching every move carefully. At the center of it all stand two nations, the United States and Iran. This is not just another regional conflict. This is a moment that could reshape global stability, because history has shown us something very important. The most dangerous wars are not always the ones that begin suddenly, but the ones that slowly build, until one moment changes everything. To many people, this situation feels sudden, like it appeared overnight in the headlines. But in reality, this moment has been building for decades. Tension after tension, warning after warning, policy decisions, military actions, and political disagreements have all contributed to the situation we see today. Each event added pressure, like layers building up over time. And now, that pressure has reached a point where even a small trigger could lead to something much larger. And this is not just about politics or distant conflict. It affects global oil supply. It affects international trade. It affects the price of fuel, even in countries thousands of miles away. For example, nearly 20% of the world's oil passes through one narrow route in the Middle East. So when tensions rise in this region, the entire global economy feels it. Because in today's connected world, no conflict stays isolated for long. To truly understand what is happening now, we have to go back in history, back to a time when the United States and Iran were not enemies, but allies. In the 1950s and 1960s, Iran was closely aligned with the West. The U.S. supported Iran's government under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, but everything changed in 1979. That year, a revolution swept across Iran. Mass protests led to the overthrow of the Shah, and a new Islamic government took power. This moment marked the beginning of a completely new relationship between the two nations. After the revolution, tensions escalated quickly. Later in 1979, Iranian students seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. They took 52 American diplomats hostage, holding them for 444 days. This event shocked the world and permanently damaged relations between the two countries. Diplomatic ties were cut. Trust completely collapsed. From that moment forward, the relationship between the United States and Iran will be defined by suspicion, hostility, and conflict. For decades after that, this conflict did not look like a traditional war. There were no full-scale invasions or direct battles. Instead, there were economic sanctions, political pressure, and indirect confrontations across the region. This kind of conflict is often called a cold conflict, where both sides oppose each other without engaging in full-scale war. But even without open fighting, the tension never disappeared. At the center of this tension was one critical issue: nuclear power. Starting in the early 2000s, concerns grew over Iran's nuclear program. Western nations feared that Iran could develop nuclear weapons. Iran insisted that its nuclear program was for peaceful energy purposes. But because of years of mistrust, neither side fully believed the other. And in a world where nuclear weapons exist, even uncertainty can be dangerous. There were attempts to resolve the issue peacefully. In 2015, a major agreement was reached, known as the Iran nuclear deal. It placed limits on Iran's nuclear program in exchange for lifting economic sanctions. But in 2018, the United States withdrew from the agreement. After that, tensions began rising again. Each failed negotiation made future agreements harder to achieve. As the years passed, military activity increased across the region. Naval fleets moved into strategic waters. Air defenses were strengthened, and intelligence reports warned that the risk of conflict was growing. By the early 2020s, many experts believed that the situation was becoming unstable. The The signs were clear. Something bigger was approaching. Then, in 2026, everything changed. A series of coordinated strikes targeted key military locations. Explosions lit up the night sky. Strategic facilities were hit with precision. The scale and intensity of the strikes made one thing clear. This was no longer just tension. This was open conflict. The impact was immediate. Important infrastructure was damaged. Military capabilities were weakened. And within hours, the situation escalated rapidly. This marked a turning point, a shift from long-term tension to active confrontation. Iran responded quickly. Missiles were launched towards strategic targets. Drones were deployed across the region. This response showed that the conflict was not one-sided. And as both sides took action, the risk of escalation increased even further. Soon, the conflict began to spread. Nearby countries became involved. Allies were drawn into the situation. And what started as a direct confrontation began to look like a wider regional conflict. This is often how larger wars begin, not with one event, but with a chain reaction. Around the world, people watched in fear. News channels ran constant updates. Governments issued warnings, and uncertainty filled the air because no one knew how far this situation could go. One location became especially important: the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway connects the Persian Gulf to global shipping routes. Nearly 1/5 of the world's oil passes through this single passage. Any disruption here could affect the entire global economy. If that route were blocked, the consequences would be immediate. Oil prices would rise sharply, fuel shortages could occur, and economies around the world would feel the impact. This is why this region is so critical. It connects local conflict to global consequences, and that impact began to show. Markets reacted quickly. Energy prices increased. Investors became uncertain. Even countries far from the conflict felt the pressure. This is how modern conflicts work. Their effects spread far beyond the battlefield. Behind the scenes, diplomatic efforts intensified. World leaders held emergency meetings. Negotiations took place quietly. Every effort was focused on one goal: preventing further escalation. For a brief moment, the world stood on edge. One miscalculation, one unexpected move, could have triggered a much larger war. A war involving multiple nations, with global consequences. Then, a fragile ceasefire was reached. The strikes slowed. Military actions decreased. For the moment, the world stepped back from the edge. But the situation remained uncertain. Because even though the conflict paused, the underlying issues were still there. The disagreements had not been resolved. And that means the risk has not disappeared. This is what makes this moment so important. History shows us conflicts like this rarely end quickly. They evolve over time. They shift and return. They grow in unexpected ways. And sometimes they reappear when the world least expects it. Today, the world is watching closely, waiting, observing, hoping that this moment does not lead to something greater. Because the question is no longer, what happened? But what happens next? And whether this conflict will remain contained or grow into something far more dangerous. And if history has taught us anything, it's this: the most dangerous moments are not always the loudest. Sometimes they are the closest calls, and sometimes they are the ones that decide the future of the world.